Welcome to Rise. From Switzerland, where the numbers keep climbing, students who are welcome on campus are staying home, and employees are returning to work sooner than ever before. I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from the beautiful kingdom of Cambodia, on the eve of the ASEAN Tourism Forum, a very happy 2022 to all of the people on the RISE community joining us on our dedicated website, on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and LinkedIn Live. And thank you for joining us for the first episode of 2022. Now, as everyone knows, Professor Hodari and I thought this was going to be a 100-day project. We are now on day 637. And believe it or not, Professor Hodari, we are 100 days from our second anniversary of RISE. And like everything with the pandemic, who would have thought? But this, as always, is the platform to keep everyone in travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation confident about and inspired about our industry that we all love so much. Thank you for joining us. We are grateful to have you on RISE, as always. And this episode, we have a very, very special one. Because if we want to take a look at what's ahead in the future, what better and who better to keep our chins up and looking upwards than someone who's from the industry of aviation. So to give us an aerial perspective of the world, Professor Hodari, please tell us more about today.
Well, besides having really the voice that I think we all want to listen to and hear from about aviation, we've got Jan Freitag from CoStar presenting some hospitality data. We've got some interesting news headlines as always, and I think a debate at the end of the show that really captures what's on everybody's minds right now. But before we hear from ourselves or our guest, as always, we want to hear from our audience. And so we've got today's poll, which magically appears now. Did your holiday plans go according to plan? Please choose one of the following. And we will see a little bit later what the results tell us about how people's holiday vacations went. And brilliant. Switching things up a little bit today, Anita, I'm going to lead us into where in the world, where is the world right now? What's the situation going on? And as always, a little bit of data for you. I'll go first today. And what's on everybody's minds, the labor situation in our industry. And here you can see that in November, we had record number of quits, people leaving the industry. We keep hearing different names for this. The Great Resignation is the term that we've been hearing a lot about lately. The number that really stood out to me was not just the 1 million number, right, which you can clearly see here from the graph, but that is 6.9% of accommodation and food service workforce quit in November. 7% of the people working in this industry quit in the month of November. I found that to be just an astounding figure that really put things in perspective for me. And what we're basically seeing here is not necessarily the labor shortage that we're always talking about, but a wage shortage, a benefit shortage, a situational shortage, creating an environment for employees at this low level of pay who are realizing there are better alternatives out there, better jobs, better careers, better industries. At least that's what they think. And that's the number one thing preoccupying executives, managers, and professors. Anita, what do you got for us today?
Fascinating, because what I'm going to look at, Professor Hodari, is taking exactly what you shared now and looking at it from the flip side. Because when we talk about the Great Resignation and people proactively leaving for many reasons, especially the last 2 years, having gotten people to really question, why am I doing this? And questioning the scenarios around exactly what their job and occupations are offering them, I want to look at the flip side. What about the people who are staying behind? What about the people who now need to take on the extra load of all of those who have left for either reasons about the jobs themselves, not liking the commute, whatever the case may be? It's so easy to forget the pressure that these people are under. And this study that came out from the Human Resource Management Society, fascinating to see how much pressure is being put on those who felt and chose they wanted to actually maintain their roles. Now, we know that what's important about this issue with COVID-19 is it's not just the physical crisis, it's the mental health crisis. And sadly, this is going to just perpetuate people's challenges in this past 2 years. Because for those that have left and decided to take another pass, that's fabulous. However, those who are left behind, someone needs to carry the load. And many of these people are at breaking point. I found this a very interesting one and quite a heart sore one, admittedly, because we all know people who are in exactly this position right now.
Interesting stuff.
So, when we look at that itself, we also now bring in one of our great Intel partners. He's been with us since the beginning of having Intel partners. It's Jan Freitag from CoStar with some STR data. Jan, over to you, sir.
Hello, Rise. Happy New Year 2022. Anita, thanks so much for having me back. Professor, hope you stayed healthy through your break. And here's to a happy, healthy, successful 2022. I appreciate you having me back last year, actually in person. That was so fun to be on a panel together. What I want to do today is, as we start the new year, is actually look back for a minute and a couple of data points that sort of struck us as the year ended. Number one, the story of 2021 is really the strong demand from the leisure traveler, especially on the very high end. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at all markets that STR covers that have luxury hotels in them, and I'm sorting it by ADR, by room rate percent change compared to 2019. So 2019 was the strongest year ever, right? And in a lot of markets, we've actually outpaced 2019. And what types of markets have done so well? Not a big surprise, right? US Virgin Islands, Turkish Riviera, St. Lucia, beach locations, not downtown locations, because if you look at those, their luxury ADRs, specifically in Asia Pac, is still between 40 and 50% off. Manila, Mumbai, Bangkok. You see that there's not a lot of pricing power on the high end because the business transient traveler and the group traveler really has not returned. So leisure traveler has really saved the day for 2021. That translates into an interesting phenomenon I'm showing you on page 2, on slide 2. The point here is that in the United States, hotel asset sales hit $45 billion last year, and that is the second strongest year ever recorded. And you see the last 3 quarters, Q2, 3, and 4 for 21, over $10 billion each. There's a lot of private equity money out there. There's a lot of interest in participating in the upside potential for the US hotel industry. And we don't think that's going to change in 2022. So I look forward to commenting on these and other trends with you here on Rise. For now, thanks so much for having me back. Have a wonderful start to the year.
Yeah, 2 really good pieces of data to give us different perspectives on the hotel industry. And I think what always strikes me with the STR data and what Jan does is, I think if we looked a year ago, there was a lot of questioning about what was going to happen, for example, with hotel transactions. And we were kept waiting for these distressed assets. We talked about this on several different episodes of Rise, always kind of waiting for this to materialize. It never really did. But there was still plenty of money, even though prices didn't really come down as we expected. There was still plenty of money, which means there are people who invest money, are still optimistic about this industry, still see things going forward. And of course, find that allocating money to real estate in the hotel sector still makes sense. And I think that's a really positive indicator for everybody to say that what we're looking for in the next couple of years is going to be positive.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's about always making sure we follow the statistics that tell us the direction of the growth and the recovery, which is critical. And importantly, it looks like in 2022, Professor Hodari, Jan is going to be a sweetie as much as he was in 2021. So thank you to him for being with us once again. Excellent. And so we move on to headlines. Sir, over to you for your first.
My first and only headline of the day. So, cases rise, criticism mounts, but ships keep cruising. This is from the January 6th New York Times. And this came one day after the CDC issued a warning that basically said, avoid cruise travel, right? A strong recommendation. They raised their threat level from 3 to 4 in the US and basically telling people, do not go on cruises. And people have not really adhered to that advice, right? Cruises are still filling up largely. I think there are less ships cruising maybe than there were 2 years ago, but they are full. And what I thought was interesting was, as I read this article was, I would not go on a cruise right now, but as you read the article, you realize that if you live in some areas of the United States where there are no mask mandates, where there are low vaccination rates, and you're walking around town, you're actually theoretically safer on the cruise. I accepted that argument where they're not letting people on in order to work nor to cruise if they're not vaccinated and if they're not tested or testing negative. And so you may be around people in a smaller, more confined environment, but those people are more likely vaccinated and testing negative than the random people you are around in stores or restaurants in many other areas. So I thought that was a really interesting argument. But it led me to this question of, and I think we're going to talk about this maybe more in a couple of weeks, but to take an entire industry and say, this entire industry is not safe, you should not do this, that's a bold statement to be making when we haven't really found ways for other industries or locations really to demonstrate that they're extremely safe. We know people are getting the virus in restaurants or in hotels or in cars or in shopping malls or at their friends' houses, and we haven't completely told people to avoid those entirely. So, I've kind of switched gears a little bit on this, or switched my perspective to say, this is really maybe a little bit too strong of a warning to say this entire industry can't be safe. There are arguments for, advising people to be very careful if you do this, and you are, of course, stuck in an environment that could haunt you if things are terrible. But I don't agree anymore with this idea of taking the industry and, poster child of danger. I thought that was a dangerous statement to make.
I'm so grateful you put this up because, to your point, you used the word bold earlier, and you're right, it's dangerous. When this announcement was made by the CDC, it felt like a hit to the stomach. And this is something we can pick up with our executive in residence when we bring him on. My immediate response, quite honestly, was to send an email to Kelly Craighead, who we've had the blessing of having on Rise, the CEO of CLIA, and just sending strength and prayers. Because the damage that this does, the profound damage this does to an entire industry, as you say, is something that is going to take months to recover from. We are now in peak booking season for summer holidays and going towards the end of next year. To make a sweeping statement from an official entity to be able to actually say this entire segment of the industry is dangerous, avoid it, with no, yes, we might have concerns, however, make sure these protocols are in place, these conditions are in place. But to make a sweeping statement like that, the depth of damage, the duration of damage is something that was just horrifying to see. And in many ways, I argue irresponsible, the same way the statement came out, avoid going to Canada. What that does for Canadian and American travel, not to mention political relationships, that's a huge deal. So I'm thrilled that you brought this up. Mine is more at the personal side in terms of frontliners. And I found this coming through. It was a major story that hit over the end of the year. And it was triggered by an ICU doctor who came out with the following quote: "I wondered whether perhaps one of the greatest risks of whatever surge comes next will be compassion fatigue, the dwindling ability to feel empathy for the unvaccinated." Now, for someone from the medical community to actually put that thought into writing is a huge call to action to all of us. People are getting dangerously bored with Mother Nature and losing respect for what Mother Nature is throwing at us. And when I saw this, my heart broke from the point of view of, for the medical community, who is now in so many ways dealing with their own cases of COVID, to have this be articulated. I thought this was incredibly important to call out, because we cannot take for granted what's happening right now. All we're being asked is stay safe, stay calm, keep your hands clean, and stay out of trouble, and keep your masks on. And this is where I thought this was an interesting one to have someone from the medical community saying, we have a problem. Any thoughts, sir?
Look, I have a friend from high school who's a pulmonologist in the U.S., and I've just listened to a podcast, that he was on and read an article, and he was talking about this exact thing, saying how he and his staff were still obviously trying to save everybody, but there was an element to kind of almost a disrespect for their profession from the unvaccinated, that it would be putting them into this situation of having to work endless hours and constantly watch people very sick or die, and not take it upon themselves to say, well, I can't do this to this profession anymore, to these people that are saving. They have many things to do. I need to be responsible. And I think this difficulty to feel empathy, I think we all started to feel that a little bit, and almost a little disrespect for saying people are putting me at risk for not vaccinating themselves. Don't want to get too political, but you know where we stand on this.
It's a tricky one, but we're at that point where I think people's colors are showing, or at least their vaccination certificates are starting to show. So my video that I wanted to bring in, this is another one that really poked my heart over the holidays. It was a story that we all heard about around the world, and I'm sure our executive residents got caught into it as well. But during the Christmas and New Year's period, what people did not expect was to be grounded. And it wasn't just Mother hitting in terms of weather. It was the fact that thousands of flights were grounded because either shortages of staff or the people who were working in aviation actually caught COVID. And so as a result, this happened. And we can go ahead with the video, please.
Numbers are still causing massive travel disruption. Meanwhile, over the holiday period, more than 2,000 flights have been cancelled globally today as airlines wrestle with staffing shortages and people calling in sick. More than 3,000 other flights have been delayed. In total, airlines cancelled more than 6,000 flights on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Boxing Day. Nadia Romero is at what's usually America's busiest airport, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. And, you know, a big story there. This isn't about people concerned about COVID. It's just people not turning up to work, so they have to cut back.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing from the airlines, right? That they just don't have the flight crews, Max, in order to keep up with their flight schedule. Now, some of this is the shortages that airlines had been dealing with for a while now. Some of it can be connected to the Omicron variant. We have heard of some technical difficulties on certain flights that have caused delays or cancellations. And we have had weather issues starting last week on Wednesday with snow and with icy, stormy conditions happening.
And a dangerous cocktail that had many people sobering up painfully over the holiday season. So our poll results from our polls, please. Very interesting.
Look at that, Anita. So somewhat managed to adapt, and no, I didn't go as planned as all. So nobody really went smoothly. Everybody had some special plans. And I put myself in this as well. We had to adapt. My daughter got sick and we needed to change our plans, and we still managed to have, a lot of good quality family time, very different than we had anticipated. And I think a lot of people had to deal with this as well.
Incredible. Interestingly, the fact that I had to adapt means by implication, something changed. So that's quite an interesting one. With that in mind, we come to our executive in residence. And admittedly, for everyone who watches Rise as our community, you know I have a great affection for aviation. And I will, full disclosure, admit that this is one of my favorite leaders in the entire world. We're blessed to have one of the most important leaders globally in our entire travel, tourism, and hospitality chain. Because as we know, we don't have an interconnected industry. We have an interdependent industry. And if this gentleman is not in his seat and taking the helm, then none of us are going anywhere. We are thrilled to have, kicking off 2022, Willie Wolfe. He is a qualified pilot, the former CEO of Aer Lingus, British Airways, and IAG as well. Critically, he is currently the Director General of the International Air Transport Association, IATA, which represents over 290 airlines in 120 countries. They carry 83% of the world's air traffic. IATA members include the world's leading passenger cargo airlines. Now, I was trying to get a sense of how do I even begin to explain what this gentleman is, not just as a personality, but as a person. And I thought, I'm not going to actually do the honors. I'm going to let some of our shared colleagues and friends do that. So I, sir, reached out to over a dozen leaders in travel, tourism, and aviation that you and I both love. And I asked them, can you define Willie Walsh in just one word? So from the UK and the US to Europe and the UAE, we heard he is someone who is determined. He is respected. He's a man of integrity. He has impact. He's bold. He's brave. He's shrewd. He's a provocateur, though one of your Iarter colleagues actually said that doesn't actually call out how passionate he is about the industry as well. And a very dearly loved colleague and friend of ours from the media said, oh, he's brutal. So with that, sir, we welcome you to the Rise stage and thank you dearly for being with us, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Anita. I wasn't sure, did they say bold or bold?
Shame, bold.
I also wasn't sure what she had said, Roy.
Well, thank you. It's great to see you both, and thank you for inviting me on.
Thanks for being here. I guess, Anita, I'll just throw out a first question. Let's look at Anita's video clip there with the number of flights needing to be canceled. And clearly the airlines don't want to cancel flights, right? We all accept that. And I guess my question for you is, how much of that is linked to the fact that airlines have been cutting down on personnel levels over the last years? As far as I understand, right, in order to become more efficient, right, we've reduced the number of flights taking place, trying to get those load factors up, make profit for the industry. I'm all in favor of that. I've studied the industry in my work for many years, but we've also seen a lot of reduction in staffing levels across the industries, which left them very thin margin in order to be able to absorb any shocks to the system. So can we talk a little bit about the industry as a whole and its ability to survive these kind of crises, given the economics of the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. However, I think this particular issues identified over the holiday period, were principally down to the new variant and the impact that was having. I think had we not seen the new variant, there would have been some cancellations because it is always a difficult time to get your staffing right, particularly getting pilots and flight attendants in the right place at the right time. And there is, as we always expect, some weather disruption. But I think what stood out this year from talking to airline CEOs was the impact that the variant had with the number of people contracting COVID or being identified as somebody who was close to somebody who had contracted it and being forced to go into isolation under various government rules. So you're quite right to highlight the focus on efficiency that the industry has had over recent years. But to be honest, I think that goes back probably to 2008, 2009. So this year was a very particular year because of the combination of events that we've witnessed over the holiday period.
Okay, so we would say then that the changes the industry made after its last major crisis a dozen years ago or so really didn't have any negative implications until this variant, which even if they had been staffed a little bit stronger, we still would have seen these kind of cancellations.
Yeah, I think that's certainly my view. And as I said, I spoke to quite a number of airline CEOs who had experienced difficulties, and the story they were telling me was this was as a result of people either being forced into isolation because of contact or actually contracting the virus over the period.
Okay, now I'll just ask a quick follow-up, kind of going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with the Great Resignation that we're seeing in leisure and in hospitality. Are you seeing that in airlines as well, people leaving the industry and difficulty to get people to join, or are you not seeing that as much in airlines?
I think we are seeing some evidence of that. As you know, I started my career as an airline pilot back in the late 70s. And since that day, we talked about a potential shortage of pilots. I've never actually seen it. I think we're actually close to it now, if not in a period where we will see a shortage of skilled personnel, principally down to the number of people who have left the industry in the past 2 years. A lot of airlines went through forced restructuring where people were either furloughed or unfortunately let go. And I think the recovery, particularly in some markets like the US domestic market, has been much faster than people had initially predicted, which is great. But I think that's caught people by surprise, and getting back to a level that we're all comfortable with will be a bit of a challenge. I don't think we've seen this in the industry before, but our industry has been hit harder, I think, than most, if not harder than all others. And I think Anita put it well. I think there is now a risk that the industry isn't seen as an attractive employment because of the uncertainty associated with the difficulties we've seen over the past 2 years. And what I would say is those uncertainties not caused by people not wanting to fly. In fact, quite the opposite. I think there's very strong evidence of strong demand for flying, but it's down to the government reaction to the virus and the border closures that we've witnessed since February, March of 2020.
Okay, great. Anita?
Willie, I just want to rewind a little bit, and for everyone who's watching live on the YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn platforms, and those on the Rise platform, just to put you in context, if I may, please. And that you've been one of the most vocal and frontline people when it comes to, from a traveler perspective, which is unique for aviation, actually speaking out about the barriers to recovery of our industry. You were one of the first to talk about the unnecessary and uncoordinated travel restrictions. You talked about process bottlenecks at airports because of all the excessive paperwork, which I must say, coming London, Zurich, Bangkok, and yesterday was not fun. When at 6:30 in the morning, I found that a 90-minute layover in Bangkok required travel insurance of $50,000 US. And I sat on the floor at the airport at the check-in desk buying travel insurance. It was terrifying knowing I have CNN commitments here. You've talked about that at length. You were talking about the high costs of PCR testing right up front, airport fees being unnecessarily passed on to travelers, the need for a single platform for travel and health information, and you've got your Iarter travel pass, which I think is a leader in terms of singularity of information, but also literally putting that confidence of information in the passenger's hands. When we now talk about the industry in terms of recovering employment, recovering the desire for people to be a part of the industry, what do you define as a critical next step for our industry, the call to action to your peers to be able to help recovery from the inside to match up what's happening on the outside? We've got you muted.
Sorry, yeah, I'm muted now. Great question. You've highlighted quite a few issues that have really challenged us in recent times. The great thing about our industry is that people do love flying. People want to travel. It's a great experience that many of us have taken for granted, if not maybe all of us have taken for granted. And to have that freedom removed from us has been very painful, not just for the people working in the industry, but for many people who depend on the industry. And we really do need to get back to a more normal environment. You commented in the opening remarks, and Demian said it, you can contract this virus anywhere. And what the data tells us actually is that one of the safest places for you to be is aboard an aircraft because of the nature of the air distribution, the fact that the air is filtered, the fact that the air is replaced. We have a safe environment. What we need to do now is try and convince governments to stop picking on our industry, because quite honestly, I believe they're using us to send a message to people about this virus. The border closures to a large degree have been unnecessary. We've seen that closing a border does not stop this virus. It is a global problem. What we've got to do is, as we talked about earlier, convince and enable people to become vaccinated, and vaccination is the key. Now, I fully recognize that there are some people who don't want to be vaccinated and indeed some that can't, but vaccination, I believe, is the key to getting back to a more normal operating environment for all of us. But, the good news is, we expect some recovery in 2022. We've seen, an improvement in 2021, and in fact, up until November, when 24th, when the Omicron was first identified, we were actually talking about the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, all of the indications were quite positive. When these restrictions are removed, we see an immediate response from people, which is great. And, you know, the sooner we can get back to facilitating people who want to travel again, the better. But what we've got to do is provide our people, those working in the industry, with greater certainty about their future. It's the uncertainty that I think has damaged us more than anything else. So having certainty around security of employment, having certainty around the fact that they will be looked after, having certainty around the fact that, you know, it is a safe environment in which to work. I think we've managed to convince our people on some of those issues, but not all of those issues. So we do have work to do to get our industry back up and running where we want it to be.
It's interesting, and just a quick follow-up on that, Demian, because the passenger survey that you do has been very valuable to get people to understand it's not the desire to travel that is the problem. It is the virus. And that's where when stage recently was Shy, the CEO of Virgin Atlantic, who you know well, he spoke personally and painfully about what it was like having to let thousands of people go. And then the next wave came along. So I think my point being, having that passenger survey data at least allows people to know, again, it's not about the desire to travel, it's the ability to travel. And hopefully we can get everything lined up to get everyone moving again with a high degree of trust. I'm curious if I can ask before we dive into questions from viewers, silver lining of this crisis in your mind?
Yeah, I think there is a greater appreciation for what the industry means. Like when you talk to people who have been unable to travel to meet friends and family, you know, who have been unable to see their loved ones who have been separated forcibly as a result of not being able to connect, I think it does highlight the importance of the industry. I would like to think that governments will have a greater appreciation of the economic contribution that aviation makes, because they can see where significant parts of the economy, leisure and tourism being, you know, a critical part of many economies, has been severely damaged. You know, Anita, you and I participated in a conference a couple of months back with the Greek Minister for Tourism, Hodari, who told us about what Greece had done to ensure that they could reopen their borders early to save the 2021 tourist season because of the dependence of their economy on tourism, and the measures that they had taken to satisfy themselves that it was safe to do so, using artificial intelligence, putting resources where those resources were best utilized, rather than a blanket ban on people coming into their country. And we saw what that meant for Greece and the recovery in air connectivity, and the Greek economy definitely benefited as a result of that. So I think there are governments who have appreciated the contribution. I think there are some who regret the measures that were put in place. But I would hope that tourism and transport ministers will be more vocal going forward and make the case for aviation and for tourism in general.
And admittedly, you gave them the soundbite because you were the one to say, we will never eliminate the risk, but we can do our best to mitigate the risk.
And that's what it's all about. You know, within the airline industry, we've always been comfortable with managing risk because it's the nature of our business, and we do it every day. And our structures enable us to assess risk and assess what actions we can take to mitigate that risk, so that we're always evaluating the situation. It's a dynamic situation. It's not static. And what we've seen with governments is they treat this almost as static. You know, they put measures in place in February, March of 2020, dealing with an unknown threat. Nobody knew what we were dealing with. So they put measures in place. But they left those measures in place for too long, having had lots of data that would have enabled them to remove the restrictions that they had put in place. And, you know, I keep pointing to data from the UK because, to be fair, they provide a lot of valuable data. You know, where if you look at the period up until the end of October, from February of 2021 to October of 2021, the positivity rate of people flying into the country was 0.8%. And for the very same period within the country, within the UK, the positivity rate was 8.4%. So the risk was not from people flying into the country. The risk was already in the country. and yet countries were closed because they felt that this was going to somehow make a difference. And the reality of it was political science that was driving these decisions rather than medical science. And we've got to get back to taking decisions based on data, based on hard evidence, and based on the scientific evidence that's available to us. And that would have enabled our industry to operate much, much better in 2020 and 2021.
Said, Professor.
I got a slightly different question. Going back to this silver lining issue, it's funny, I just got off the phone with an airline a couple hours ago that I'm supposed to fly tomorrow. This trip isn't going to happen. And I was able to change it for a few weeks from now. I paid, 20 euro fare difference, very fair. I thought that was well handled. I could have done it with my app if I wasn't changing city. They allowed me to change the city for a new ticket. This was a pleasure. Is this going to stay around after we're through the end of this crisis? Are some of the more customer-friendly policies that airlines and other industries, hotels have also done, but let's focus on airlines, or are we going to go back to these very restrictive measures that made changing things difficult, et cetera? Or are the airlines recognizing, hey, there's a benefit to us being more flexible, and we've learned to be able to do that in a cost-effective way?
I think that's a great question. And personally, I believe we're not going back to where we were. I think one of the great things about our industry is we do learn and we do adapt. Now, in many cases, we're forced to learn and we're forced to adapt. And out of that comes some positives. And I think this is one of the positives that we'll see. You talk to every airline CEO, they will talk about having the customer at the center of everything they do. I think, I talked about a greater appreciation for aviation. I think within aviation, there's a greater appreciation for the customer. So I don't think we're going back to where we are. And the other thing that I think will change is, better technology to enable the customer to look after themselves as well. We have seen airlines adapt their systems to enable customers to make changes in the way you've described. Indeed, you can do it through many of the airline apps now. So there is always a positive from these crises, but I think this is an area where there definitely will be some benefits, both for the customer and for the industry going forward.
I hope so. Anita, should we take some questions? Should we take some questions from our audience?
I'll do. Perfect.
Okay, Grace, question? Do you got one for someone?
Yes, actually, we have one from Jeff Poole, who has joined us before on the show. And Jeff would like to know, how will Iarter, advocacy and messaging change in the future?
I don't think our messaging will change significantly. One of the things that I made clear when I joined Iarter is that, we do need to have a strong, unified voice for the industry. And I think we've got to be prepared to call out bad behavior when we see it and to be critical of actions when those actions are clear to us. I'm not being critical of people who went before me, but I think we could have been more forceful in some of the issues that face the industry, particularly in the early part of this crisis. I think when I look at the behavior of airports at the moment, where we see quite a number of airports looking to recover lost profitability, quickly as we try to recover the industry. I think some of the behaviors I've seen there are outrageous, and we need to be prepared to call that out. And the great thing about the role that I have is that I have the freedom to do that in a way that many airline CEOs individually can't do it. They're maybe fearful of the reaction that they would get if they were to be too vocal, either of government or of their partner airports, whereas I can do that without fear or favor. And as Anita knows, I enjoy doing it. I don't shy away from these sort of battles. So as I said, I don't think Iarter's messaging and advocacy is going to change significantly. I think you should expect us to be a bit more forceful, a bit more direct than maybe we have been in the past.
It's interesting, if I can jump in there, sorry, from an outside-in perspective. There has been a change. You're much more passenger-centric now. And that's been really important because it pulled the industry together in a way that those in the pure travel and tourism couldn't before. We don't have an industry unless we have aviation. And your taking on a much more passenger voice, Willie, has been incredibly valuable because you have the data, because you are the front line. That's been brilliant. And even Julia Simpson, who's our guest on Rise in 2 weeks' time as the head of the WTTC, having an aviation leader at the helm of a travel and tourism industry body is brilliant, because no one is going anywhere unless your link in the chain is well-defined and very strong. So from an industry point of view, travel and tourism, thank you for that. And credit where it's due, Jeff Poole was the one who gave me provocateur, but argued it did not reflect your passion well enough. So I know Jeff is watching. Jeff, we love you dearly, and thank you for the little blush on Willie's face at the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a little follow-up question. I come from the hotel background, so I'm curious, have you seen greater coordination between airlines and hotels and other sectors of the industry, not just at the official level, not just at the WTTC level or et cetera, but just CEO to CEO, or is there more of a collaborative feeling because we need each other to get through this, or was it always there and it's just continued, or did you see a change?
No, I think we have seen a change. I think we've seen closer cooperation. I think we've seen alignment of messages. I think we've seen, shared advocacy. So it clearly has been the case that, given the impact has been so severe on the travel and tourism industry, that we have tried to work together. So it's brought a lot of the industry closer. And I think there has been great support. You've seen sometimes the hotel industry would take the lead with a message, and then it might be the airline industry, or it might be the cruise industry. And in fact, at Iarter, we've worked with the ITF, we've worked with the maritime industry, we've worked with road haulage to try and get messages around the challenges that our people have faced when trying to go to work, particularly, crossing borders and the impact that that has had. So I believe there has been greater cooperation, both at an industry body level, but also at individual airline to partner level. And that particularly is the case with many airlines and their hotel partners.
And I got another,
sorry, just a and you have the official relationship with the UNWTO on the intelligence side. Because I think what people often forget when we talk about aviation, it's also the bellies of the plane. So with those 16 to 18,000 aircraft grounded at the peak of the pandemic, that also meant the trade was stopping as well. So that's where it's very easy for people to forget the mix.
That's a great point. But that's a great point, Anita, because, traditionally, about 50% of global air cargo travels in the belly hold of passenger aircraft. And with the massive disruption to long haul travel, a lot of that capacity to transport cargo was not available. And this is where I think we do have to give great credit to a lot of airlines and their teams, that they were able to pivot their business from being a passenger-centric business to a cargo-centric business in the short term. Because without that, we wouldn't have had the supply of critical medical equipment, critical PPE, and indeed, a lot of other critical pieces of equipment that traditionally would have gone by sea. Because, as you know, there was massive disruption to the transport of goods by sea as well, and we're still seeing that today. So providing additional capacity by flying passenger aircraft solely for the carriage of cargo has been very important for global trade at this critical time. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for conscious decision by the management teams in airlines to switch their business. And it's not that easy to do because you had to actually change the whole thinking and often the culture of the business to make that change, where in the past, cargo, I don't think was fully appreciated for the contribution it makes to the economics of the business, but I can tell you it definitely is appreciated now.
Well, we've spoken several times on Rise about the heroes in aviation who were carrying the medical supplies and the medics. And if it wasn't for them, we would not have been able to, well, globally, the community would not have been able to contain the virus in many ways. So credit where it's due. You're absolutely right. Professor.
I had two quick things. One was a joke, which was to say that your Christmas present is in one of these canceled flights, so just stay patient. And my question for Willie was about private jets. We had people on, some entrepreneurs about a year, I can't remember exactly when, a year and a half ago, talking about how this was just driving so much demand for their industry. They were growing. Do you see that as a long-term trend, that people that have been discovered and moved towards this are going to stay and that's a growth industry? Or do you think that'll sort of step back a little bit in its success once the airline industry has recovered fully?
It's a great question. I think some of it will be retained. I think there is a permanent shift in some cases. But in other cases, I think it's been facilitated by the fact that commercial air traffic has not been as strong. So these private jets have been able to get access to airports and slots that otherwise wouldn't have been available to them. So, we have certainly seen, if you look at Eurocontrol, who provide data on a daily basis, you'll see that, cargo flights have exceeded 2019 levels. Private jet activity have exceeded 2019 levels. Domestic aviation is broadly back to where it was in 2019. And the one that suffered most is international, where there's a border involved. So I think some of that private executive jet activity will remain in place. But as I said, some of it I think has been facilitated by the reduction in commercial aircraft. So it may not be a permanent shift.
Okay, but it must be still a threat to traditional airlines that is stealing business travelers, last minute bookers, and which is not a market I assume the airlines would be willing to let go very easily.
Yeah, the interesting thing, and I haven't talked about this much publicly, but what we're seeing when we look at data available to us in IATA is actually that the premium travel, now it's important to differentiate between business travel and premium travel, because as you know, a lot of people who travel in the premium cabins of aircraft are not traveling on business. And indeed, there are a lot of business people who are traveling in the economy cabins. But what we've seen is the recovery is actually broadly in line with one another, that we're seeing the premium and non-premium travel recover at the same pace, which surprised me. I didn't think it would, but I think it goes back to the presentation that Jan gave you. There are a lot of people who are traveling in the premium cabins to explore parts of the world that maybe they wouldn't have seen before. So premium leisure has become an important part for the industry, and that has tended to be a segment that is robust even through the cycle. So personally, I'm not overly concerned about business travel recovering. I think it will, but I think there's growth in the non-business premium travel that maybe we hadn't expected, and that's been one of the surprises that I've seen in evaluating the data that's available to us.
Okay.
And especially number of people around the world who have not touched their travel budgets for the last 2 years. This is their celebration of getting back out in the world. So it's in the travel and tourism side, it's a great lift in terms of the revenues coming into the industry, but it's not long-term from the point of view of keeping people being able to hold those budget levels, but it's great. Can we grab a last question from the audience, please, before we hand over?
Yes, of course. And I feel this is a great one to finish on. We've had a question come in really asking, why are you so passionate about aviation?
Yeah, it's, I do love it. I started in the industry as a 17-year-old straight out of school into flying training. I spent all of my working life in the industry, and I love it. I think it's a fabulous industry. It's challenging, it's rewarding. Every day is different. You meet fantastic people. You feel like you're doing something that's really positive. And, it's always changing. The technology changes, the challenges change, the environment, changes. It's just such a rewarding industry to be part of. And, I've always said that the day I woke up and didn't feel excited about going to work is the day I, would leave. And, I still feel excited about it. I'm loving being part of IATA, being a spokesperson for the industry. I love what I do, and I love the industry. And yeah, I think you'll find if you talk to people who are in the airline industry that they'll probably share all of those views. Yes, there are tough times. Yeah, yes, there are horrible days, and we've all gone through them. But after every horrible day, there's the sun rises, and it's another beautiful day, and we get back to work and we get back to doing what we love doing.
Brilliant. Well, Willie, as we wrap up, I told you very honestly and very excitedly, you were one of the few sources of really good news in the last pandemic, or this pandemic, when we heard that you were taking over the helm at Iarter and taking over the torch from Alexander. So for everything you have done, I love when you lose your temper, because that makes everyone stand up. So thank you from all of us at Rise for bringing you to the stage. We're profoundly grateful.
Thank you, Anita. Great to see you. And I hope to see you again soon.
Hey, Willie, from my end as well, thanks so much for being here. And given that you're just up the road from EHL, hopefully I can get you to come to campus one of these days and speak to our students. I think it would be really useful for them to hear not only your passion for the industry, but your knowledge about it as well. So I will be in touch.
Demian, I'd love to do that. I really enjoy doing that. So please, anytime, very happy to meet with you.
Okay, thanks again.
Not at all. Bye.
Now do you see why I love Willie Walsh so much?
I still don't know why he loves you, but yeah, I can see why you do. I do. Yeah. No, he was great. He was great. I'm excited to bring him to school. Grace, I think we're ready. It's time for Total Knockout. Grace, what debate is Anita going to lose at today?
Rude.
Now, it's not rigged this time, Demian. So the debate today is, should employers be allowing/requiring employees who have tested positive to return to work after only 5 days? You are saying yes, Demian, so you can go first.
All right, I'm going to say a couple things. First, I'm assuming we're talking about places where vaccines are available, people can get vaccinated and or boosted. So I'm talking, most of Europe, America, Asia, because I'm not exactly sure the vaccination abilities in other areas. And I would say in these areas where we have no obligation to go out to a restaurant or out to the movie theater or out for any leisure activities, we're making that choice as consumers. And so we know the risk that we're putting ourselves in by doing that. The employees, on the other hand, they need to work. They need to bring home salaries. They need to keep companies afloat and not allowing them to go bankruptcy. And if the government and medical authorities are saying after 5 days you are safe to come back to work and you do not feel sick, right? You feel asymptomatic or you've recovered and you can go back to work and want to go back to work and feel able to do so, then I think it's fine to ask the employees to come back after those 5 days. Obviously, the employee who is still sick and coughing and doesn't feel well and feels that they would be communicating this disease to somebody else, clearly shouldn't be required to come back. But for most of the people who have recovered or are recovering or asymptomatic at that point, the business context, the world situation that we're in now, the fact that customers who frequent these restaurants, et cetera, are vaccinated or testing negative and are willing to take the risk, and I hate even to use the word risk, but to do so and go out to these places, I feel that we're not putting them at any undue risk. But again, I want to reemphasize, this is in places where customers have the option to go or not, where they have the option to be vaccinated, and where employees can be vaccinated and boosted and have the choice to not go if they're sick, they feel sick.
Okay, where do I begin, sir?
Oof, I think we're out of time, Anita.
I'm taking on the no, only because I think the world, as I said earlier, has become very frustrated and flippant about what Mother Nature is trying to teach us. To your point, yes, there's restaurants and there's certain entertainment zones, but we're talking about in general, should people be required to go back? Is it open? Firstly, it depends. We need to apply common sense and compassion. Common sense is it depends on the role. So if someone is in a work from home role, they can work around that. That depends on how they're feeling and their strength. If it's an external, it depends on their role. It also depends on how does that make other employees feel that they're coming into contact with? How does it make customers feel that they might be in contact with someone who might have been ill? My point is this: we're at a very dangerous point in the pandemic where boredom is going to put people at more risks. Mother Nature, there's no one said 5 days, 10 days, 14 days. And even the CDC and the WHO, the incubation period for COVID-19, which is time from becoming infected to symptom onset, is average 5 to 6 days. However, it can be up to 14 days. During this period, anyone can be infected and be contagious to other people. The CDC also calls out people who are unvaccinated and people with underlying conditions continue to be at risk of suffering more from COVID-19. When they say that most people don't feel any symptoms, most people are fine after 5 days. What about the minority that are still very much at risk because of whether it's vaccination status or underlying conditions? That's a huge issue. What we also can't forget, we know the fatigue, we know the draining that COVID can have on people. My big issue with COVID has always been the long COVID and the impact that that has neurologically and respiratorily. By asking people to go back 5 days after they've tested, when they test negative, you're putting them in a position of undue pressure. You're putting people around them at a risk. And on top of that as well, it's just recognizing or not recognizing that this is a virus that is going to linger psychologically as well as physically. We need to be careful about that. For this reason, a lot of people who test positive are not admitting to their employers that they're positive because they don't want to be stigmatized, they don't want to be kept away, and they don't want to face isolation. That's a whole nother issue of ethics. My point being, by saying to people 5 days says that they're okay to go back. Who says they are? And certainly, do the employees around them, do the customers around them feel comfortable with that? So I'm saying 5 days, no. It all depends on what job they're in, what state they're in, but a general statement of 5 days is fine, I don't think it's fine at all. I leave it at that.
All right, Grace, I'm going to cede my time to the senator from Wyoming, and let's see what you have for us.
Do you agree with Demian that we have no obligation to go out and we are making that choice? The employees need to work and they need a paycheck. If you're not sick and you know symptoms and feel able to do so, then why not? Or do you agree with Anita that the world is frustrated and flippant? We need to apply common sense and compassion. WHO has said 5 days because it's not the WHO. And we know that fatigue and draining is setting in with long COVID and we are putting people under undue pressure.
All right. Oh, Anita. Good start to 2022 for you.
Excellent. And we move on. So what's next in our 2022? Very much. We are excited to see everyone back here. Oops, sorry. And I'll hand it back to Hodari. Over to you.
Look, we love to feature career opportunities to our audience. We've got a great one from Cedar Capital Partners. They are an investor and owner, an operator of hotels. They've got a position in London for an analyst. If you've got 1 to 2 years of experience in consulting, developing, or banking, or something similar, if you're detail-oriented, interested in numbers, financial analysis, this is a great company to work for. I'm good friends with a lot of the people and have a lot of former students that work in there. So just send us an email at riseweekly2020@gmail.com, and we will forward your interest along to them. And I think, Anita, you wanted to go to the next slide.
Sorry, I'm excited. So 2 weeks time, January 31st, we have the CEO and president of the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council, Julia Simpson. Thrilled to have her. The WTTC represents over 200 companies in travel and tourism, representing 2/3 of a $1 trillion US turnover, the equivalent of 30% of the entire sector. Beautiful membership itself. She will be joining us. Really thrilled to have her on. Between now and then, please, you're more than welcome to go to rise-weekly.com. All of our past episodes are there. You can watch it there. But until then, from all of us at Rise, great love and thanks for being with us. As always, we are incredibly grateful to have you all as part of the Rise community, whatever platform you are on. But please do register, because that allows you to get into the Q&A, into the polls, and into the voting itself. And warmest wishes to all of those celebrating Chinese Spring Festival, during which over 1.5 billion people are expected to be traveling in, around, and out of China. As always, from my side, stay strong, stay safe, stay hopeful, keep your hands clean, and stay with Rise. Professor, for you to the close.
I don't think I have anything to add to that other than have a great 2 weeks, and we look forward to seeing you on the 31st of January for our next episode. Bye, everybody. Bye, Anita.
Take care.